We originally recorded this podcast before Hurricane Helene hit North Carolina, which caused catastrophic damage to towns across western North Carolina and in Asheville, where our guest, Chef William Dissen, resides, and where his restaurant, The Marketplace, is located. I'm relieved to report that Will, his family, and his restaurant all survived the natural disaster, but things didn't come out so nicely for others in that area. Many businesses were lost. People lost their lives, and there's catastrophic damage, as we said, to be repaired. And if you'd like to contribute to that relief effort, I'd suggest thinking about the Red Cross or going online to find out what other organizations in the Asheville area or places south of there that got hit so hard by the hurricane as well, and see what you might do to help. So today's podcast is a gastronomic treat. I'm talking with Chef William Dissen, James Beard Award-winning chef and owner of the restaurant, The Marketplace, located in Asheville, North Carolina. I've eaten there and had a wonderful time. It's really a terrific restaurant. Will is the founder of 4 award-winning restaurants and draws inspiration from traveling the world, creating dishes that tell a story, surprising guests with inventive food preservation techniques, and bringing classic dishes with explosive flavors to life. I remember the flavors in the Marketplace when I was there. They were really pretty extraordinary. He published a debut cookbook in 2024 titled Thoughtful Cooking: Recipes Rooted in the New South. Food and Wine magazine recognized it as the best spring cookbook and praised how he takes readers on a culinary journey organized by the 4 seasons of Appalachia's most sought-after ingredients. Will also enjoys the fame of being the first and only chef to beat Gordon Ramsay in a cook-off on Nat Geo's TV, Gordon Ramsay Uncharted Smoky Mountains. Welcome to Leading Voices in Food podcast series. I'm Kelly Brownell, Professor Emeritus of Public Policy at Duke University, Dean Emeritus and Director Emeritus of the World Food Policy Center. So, William, you were early to the farm-to-table local foods concept. Some years ago, when I dined at your restaurant, The Marketplace, I liked the philosophy not to mention the food. Would you please tell us what led you down this road?
I'm originally from West Virginia, from the Appalachian Mountains, and my grandparents were farmers that lived in a very rural part of the state. I grew up in suburbia in the capital of Charleston, West Virginia, but spent a lot of my weekends on their farm. And they very much lived the Appalachian mentality and the culture of farming, of putting things up for the year. They canned and pickled and preserved and fermented and dehydrated, and they foraged, and they had honeybees to pollinate their garden. They irrigated with fresh spring water and things that I think now in 2024, kind of these hipster DIY trends that people are saying they're doing in bigger cities. But these are things my grandparents were doing to sustain themselves. And I'd say that those ideas and ideals imprinted upon me about not just sustainability and how to treat the earth, but also about how to make food delicious, because great food starts fresh.
And from this initial exposure to food customs of your youth, what led you to being a chef?
I think in those hot, sweaty August days, as they say, up in the holler of my grandparents' farm, we'd sit in the front porch and shuck corn and string beans. I've really kind of kindled a love affair with food. One of my first jobs I was a newspaper delivery boy. And shortly after that, I was trying to hustle to make some more money. And I ended up washing dishes at a local country club. And I think a very similar story for a lot of chefs. One day, the garde manger cook, or the salad and sandwich cook, called out, and the chef said, "Can you make sandwiches and salads?" And I thought, sure, I can do that. And I haven't really looked back since.
You've been a chef at many fine restaurants in major cities. What led you to Asheville, North Carolina in particular?
Yeah, so after I left West Virginia, I lived all over the place, was in New York and California and South Carolina, and ended up back here where I'm now in Asheville. I have my restaurant, The Marketplace. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the really beautiful region. National Geographic has voted it time and time again as one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. It's actually a temperate rainforest. There's species of wild edible greens and medicinal greens. There's species of lizards and snakes and things that you only find here in this region. And it's not just beautiful, it's also a really thriving ecosystem.
Terms like intentional, mindful, and in your case, thoughtful, it's in the title of your book, can be applied to cooking and eating. What does it mean to you?
I'd say in general, it's going back to what I mentioned about my grandparents and really focusing on being present, but also planning ahead. I feel like in this day and age, we're so connected to computers and phones and social media that we've kind of got disconnected from our food system. And, people say, well, technology is driving the world and we need to be, logged in to be able to stay relevant. And I don't disagree with that, but I feel as our society is doing that, we are losing touch with nature. And if you go back one generation, two generations and ask anyone, their grandparents, I'm sure, grew a garden or were farmers, and they probably went through acts of preservation because there weren't Whole Foods in every corner. It wasn't Amazon delivery. So they had to plan ahead and to be in touch with the time of year and able to sustain themselves and their families. And certainly we're fortunate, now in 2024 to not have to think that way all the time. But I do think there's a lot of value into being a little more thoughtful about the world around us. And I think that's really what I want to try to show people with my book, Thoughtful Cooking, is that connecting yourself to the food system enables us to connect ourselves to the environment, enables to connect ourselves to our local economy, to our community, and to be reconnected with those that make our food. And I think that's an important thing that a lot of us are missing this day and age.
And but please tell us more. What does thoughtful cooking look like in action?
I think thoughtful cooking is kind of multifaceted, right? I think it's being aware of what's in season. Here we are in August in the Carolinas. What's in season this time of year, right? We have tomatoes and peppers and corn and okra, and we have all these different things that are uniquely delicious and in season. But it's a conversation when I talk about local food and talk about sustainability. I ask people, it's a very cliche question. When would you like to eat a tomato? July, August, or January, February? And people say, oh, well, of course, July or August, that's when tomatoes are delicious and they're bright in color and they're ripe and they're juicy and sweet. And I think those are the things that we're not being as thoughtful about nowadays about where our food comes from and why things are in season. So I think that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is it's just taking the time to be mindful of the world around us. I think we're all moving so fast that I want people to be able to slow down and enjoy cooking. Cooking, don't get me wrong, as a father of two running many businesses, I have, I joke with my kids, it feels like a chopped competition in my kitchen some days when I open the fridge and I've got 30 minutes to make dinner for a couple hangry kids, but also taking the time to enjoy cooking. I think there's something to be said about slow food and taking the time to cook in your kitchen, open a bottle of wine, turn the music up, actually connect with people around you rather than just staring and scrolling on your phone. And I think it's a way to really bring people together. And then the other facet of it is thoughtful cooking is that when the way we choose to eat and really creates an opportunity to vote with our forks, that there's a lot of advocacy and sustainability you can do just in taking the time to think about where your food comes from.
I can so relate to what you're saying. Not too far from where I live in Durham, North Carolina, there's an unbelievably wonderful farmers market, the state farmers market in Raleigh, which I imagine you've been to one time or another. But what a pleasure it is to go there when the strawberries are just coming into season, and then the blueberries, and then the peaches, and then the apples, and not to mention all the vegetables. And we just this weekend had guests and made a corn and tomato salad with all these wonderful things that were there. And it just felt there's something special about making it when you've gone to buy the ingredients from a farmer who grew them. And you're right, every part of the experience is better doing that. How in the restaurant do you try to accomplish getting people closer to their food and more thoughtful about it?
So I really at our flagship restaurant, the Marketplace in Asheville, the whole premise is local food sustainability. I really like to show that we can create a sustainable business that can last the test of time, and I think we have as we're celebrating our 45th year this year in 2024. But for me, it's taking the time to meet the makers, the artisans who are making cheeses or, types of charcuterie, dairy farmers, vegetable farmers, livestock farmers, fishermen, right? Taking the time to talk to them about what they do, to be a little more thoughtful and inquisitive about how we're eating. Doesn't necessarily mean that, we're eating healthy food all the time, right? But understanding how they're taking care of it. As you really dive into the food system, there's a lot of things that if you actually dive in and look at what's happening behind the scenes in some of these bigger commercial commodity farms, you may not like about how the people are being treated that are growing the livestock or the vegetables, about how they're treading on the environment and not in a non-sustainable way. And then also, what's going into the product that's going into your body. Are they putting hormones and different types of spray or whatnot, to cut in chemicals that could affect your body in the long run? And I know I'm not a crazy health nut, but I want to make sure that, when I'm eating clean, I feel
Mhm.
good. And I think a lot of it too, I was very fortunate after I did undergraduate studies at West Virginia University. I went on to the Culinary Institute of America for a culinary degree, and I took a wine course there, and it really imprinted on me about viticulture with how they grow grapes. They study this thing called a Brix level, which is the sugar level in a grape. And they use this fancy electronic device called a mass spectrometer that it measures the sugar content in the grape. And so the vintners go around their farms and they test the grapes as they're approaching ripeness. And they wait to pull them off the vine till they reach that perfect ripeness, because the grapes are higher in sugar. They're naturally sweeter. They're going to ferment into more delicious wine. But every fruit and vegetables has a Brix level. And so if we're able to really be in touch with nature, with the time of year when vegetables and fruits are ripe, they're naturally going to taste better. The vegetables are going to be bright in color, heavy for their size because they're naturally ripe and sweet, and they're just going to taste better. I don't know about you, but that doesn't necessarily make me feel like I'm a health nut, but it makes me feel like I'm in search of great flavor.
Well, it shows how much you appreciate good food and how important good food can be for the way we feel about ourselves, obviously for the environment and things. I've often thought it would be a wonderful experience to go to a restaurant and have a meal, but before the meal, be able to interact with the farmer. The farmer comes in and talks about whatever she or he has contributed to that particular meal and how the food was created and what their relationship is to the land and whatever practices they use. I've always thought, I mean, you get those things outside of a restaurant, but I've always thought it'd be really interesting in a restaurant to do that kind of thing. Maybe that's something you've already done.
We've definitely hosted a number of farm dinners. Actually have one coming up. There's a group out of Santa Cruz, California called Outstanding in the Field.
Hmm.
This will be our eighth dinner we've done with them over the years, but we will do a white tablecloth dinner in the middle of a farm field for 200 people and cook over a wood fire. And, the hogs and the sheep are grazing the pasture beside it, and the vegetable gardens, the other pasture over. And for a lot of people, they've never stepped foot on a farm, and it's a really transcending experience.
I think the answer to this is pretty obviously yes, but it seems like today's youth, like I think about students that I teach in college, are so much more interested in the story of their food than people were just a generation or two ago. When I grew up, all we cared about was that we had food and the better it tasted, which basically meant how much it was processed and how much sugar and things it had in it. That was really about all we knew. But now people are asking a whole different level of questions about where their food came from. Do you see opportunities for working with children to help maximize that?
I do, yeah. There's an organization that I've been on the board for a long time locally called the Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project.
Mhm.
They have a subsidiary called Growing Minds Program, and it works to put healthy local food into schools and to teach children about the opportunity to eat healthy and eat fresh. So I think it's a great thing. I do a lot of food advocacy work as well on Capitol Hill, where I go and lobby for different food policy. I've done that at Capitol Hill, internationally as well. Helped create the Chef's Manifesto for the UN's World Food Policy, and spoke a number of conferences around the world about it. But it starts with children, right? If we're able to teach them about eating healthy and eating local, it's going to be something that's ingrained in them forever. And local food, I feel like a lot of people say, "Oh, well, shopping at the farmer's market, like that's only for the 1%." And, I feel like I find a lot of great deals at the market, but a lot of farmers markets nowadays, because of different food policy and food advocacy, they have things even with SNAP benefits that they'll do 2 for 1. So you can really get some great deals at the market as well.
So when you mentioned you've done some advocacy activity in Washington arguing for certain policies. What kind of policies have you been involved with?
Well, given that we're in a presidential election year, I always like to tell people I don't really like politics very much, but I really like policy because policy is where you can take action and make change. I've done a lot of advocacy work advocating for things like the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which provides federal fishery management and sustainability ratings for different species of seafood. I also worked on the Childhood Nutrition Reauthorization Act, which was to add more funds to school lunches for children. Farm bill. Gosh, I've done so many different things. It's good to get out there. I think a lot of it, you go speak with our politicians and they get bombarded with different bills and lobbying groups all the time. But I think when they see somebody like myself that, you know, chef, I'm an employer, business owner, real estate owner, somebody that comes in, it's different than maybe your standard blue suit lobbyist. They a lot of times take the time to listen. And many of them come in to eat at our restaurants. So it's an opportunity to really try to direct change. And hopefully when they go to vote for these various bills, they think about the opportunity that they've had to meet with constituents like myself and hope they remember to do the right thing when they place their vote.
That sounds good. Well, you also show how many ways there are to interact with the food system and ways to try to make improvements. And that the scope of your activity is really pretty impressive. So let's loop back to your book. In your book, you talk about again, in the title, you talk about the New South. What is the New South?
So, I think a lot of people think of Southern food as shrimp and grits and gumbo and very, heavy, rich country cooking. There's a lot of African American influence from the days of slavery and recipes, ingredients that were brought over during slavery from West Africa and traditions that arose in Southern cooking from those times. Like everywhere else in the world, the South is evolving and it's one of the most popular places for people to move to within our country, the United States. And we're starting to see this evolution of Southern food, right? It's not just this kind of typical stick to your ribs Southern cooking anymore. We're starting to see other cultures come in. There's, Indian culture, African American culture, Asian cultures that are coming in, and they're taking these traditions of Southern food and local food, but then adding their flavors to it. And to me, it's a really exciting time because biased, I love Southern food. I love shrimp and grits. I love these different dishes that are so wonderful. But I love when somebody comes in and they take a recipe and they add their own touch to it and they tweak it. Because to me, that's adding to our heritage as Southerners. And so for me, recipes rooted in the New South is this evolution that we're taking Southern food on.
So, if you wouldn't mind, give us some examples of some of the recipes that are in your book.
I have a number of dishes that I think are really exciting. We've got one of my favorites. I have a red wine braised beef short rib, serving that with a chili cumin sauce and then blue cheese and green apple coleslaw.
Mm.
So it's kind of taking this idea of, of beef and coleslaw, but kind of adding in some other flavors from other cultures. Like within that, there's a lot of kind of Hispanic flavors as well.
Well, I loved looking through the recipes in your book. And I don't think there was one that I looked at where I wasn't surprised by some ingredient that I didn't expect or putting things together in unique ways. So the book strikes me as being highly creative. And I can imagine how much work was involved in putting that book together and how long it took. And it must sort of be the culmination of a lifetime of work. So congratulations for doing that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think I mentioned before about the other work I do outside the restaurant. You know, I didn't just want to write a marketplace restaurant cookbook. I
Right.
wanted to write a cookbook that talks about, the power of food and the philosophy behind it. But then also have some delicious and creative recipes in there that can be inspiring to folks as well.
Oh, that sounds really good. Well, for all our listeners, I urge you, if you're in the Asheville, North Carolina area, to consider going to the marketplace. I can vouch firsthand for how good it is. And congratulations again for publishing your book and for joining us today. It's been really wonderful to talk to you.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me and excited for what's ahead for us here going into our 46th year at the marketplace and other restaurant, Billy D's Fried Chicken. We're expanding that as well. Lots of fun things going on.
So, our guest today is William Dissen, chef, restaurateur, and author of the new book, Thoughtful Cooking Recipes Rooted in the New South. Thank you to Deborah Hill for producing this series, and thank you to our listeners for being with us. If you'd like to subscribe to Leading Voices in Food podcast series, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Transcripts and podcasts are also available on the website of the Duke World Food Policy Center. This is Kelly Brownell.